Hello and good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again. A few months ago when I started doing these Patreon poll movie reviews, I looked at Mission Impossible starring Tom Cruise, and today, thanks to the people on Patreon who support me, like Stephen Herring and Gordon Williams, I have the dubious pleasure of looking at the sequel, the creatively titled Mission Impossible 2. As a little recap from last time, I liked Mission Impossible. It's a fun espionage thriller with some great action and on a scene-by-scene basis is very well directed, but the script is full of holes and confusing leaps of logic, and as for the star himself,
I just don't like him.
Nonetheless, still an enjoyable film in its own right, and created some pretty iconic moments, which are still referenced and parodied to this day. It's probably a bit overpraising to say that the film was something of a touchstone, but you know what, it's a movie that left its mark in cinema history and culture, and that can't be ignored. So, they were clearly going to make a sequel, but what is kind of baffling is that it took them 4 years to release the second one. I mean, particularly as this was the 1990s, and even the Bond films were doing one every 2 years, but I suppose Tom Cruise was pretty preoccupied with dramas, with Jerry Maguire, Without Limits, Magnolia, and Eyes Wide Shut all being released in the intervening years. So, interestingly, Mission Impossible 2 had to go some ways to re-establishing Cruise as an action star. Cruise is back as producer along with Paula Wagner, and one of the screenwriters, Robert Towne, returns, but director Brian De Palma did not, so instead we have John Woo in the director's chair, director of various martial arts action movies from Hong Kong, and has also dabbled in some Hollywood projects, most notably, for me, Face Off. This, on paper, is quite exciting. Woo is very much a director with a signature style, much like De Palma, and I like that the series is aiming for this caliber of directors to give each film a different flavour. I think Woo is very much miscast in his role on this film in particular, but we'll come to that later on. It was a common criticism about the first film that the plot was convoluted, confusing, and difficult to follow, so in reaction to that, the plot here seems to be relatively easy to follow, for the most part. The film opens really efficiently. A biochemical expert gets in touch with the IMF with information regarding a deadly virus that he's created, which his employers are looking to exploit for profit. The expert only wishes to deal with Ethan Hunt, who seemingly meets with the expert to transfer him to safety, along with the only cure to the deadly virus. But bad things start to go down as a nefarious bunch of fellows knock out everyone on the plane. Ethan is revealed to not be Ethan, but a bloke who steals the cure and, in a particularly sadistic move, leaves the plane to crash into a mountain, killing all on board. This is a particular detail that I remember very vividly from seeing the film so many years ago. I couldn't have told you anything else about the story of this film, except for at the very start, a plane full of innocent people die, and I think that says a lot about how kind of out of place this scene is. It's memorable, but I'm not sure if it's necessarily for the right reasons. It's just kind of jarring to see in a film like this so many innocent people killed so coldly. The Bond films always used to make a conscious effort to reassure the audience that innocent people were not harmed in a mass capacity. This kind of changes a little bit in the Craig era, but in something like GoldenEye, for example, I mean, I have no idea what kind of rubber band skeleton contortionism is needed by this guy to survive that, but somehow, miraculously, he survives. In Mission Impossible 2, seeing so many innocent people die, in a plane crash no less, and for all of those deaths not to matter too much in the grand scheme of things, feels a little mean-spirited. But anyway, after all that, we get to meet the real Ethan Hunt, played once again by Tom Cruise, who is doing some precarious rock climbing. He does his own stunts, you know. Despite Cruise's very distracting hairdo, I actually really love this scene with Ethan climbing. It takes place over some of the credits, and it's a great way to be reintroduced to this character. He's actually on vacation, and he's contacted by the IMF in such an over-the-top way. It's kind of fantastic, but also very cheesy at the same time, and seemingly without irony, and this will be a major complaint of mine for the whole film. There are going to be so many crazy and outrageous things that happen, and in a movie that had tongue firmly in cheek, that would be fine, but here things are taken just a bit too seriously, and Tom Cruise is not as self-aware and self-deprecating an actor as, like, for example, Sean Connery or Roger Moore were, or in fact, you know what, I'm just gonna say, I think that every actor actor who has played James Bond is a better actor than Tom Cruise and can play this kind of suave hero with just the right level of self-awareness, much better than what I've ever seen Cruise do, but particularly here where things are being taken so seriously, he's such a letdown. I was kind of wondering if, like, I was supposed to be laughing at the hamminess and cartooniness throughout the movie, but from all the behind-the-scenes stuff on the Blu-ray, all the people involved talk about this film like they've made friggin' Casablanca or The Godfather or something, and that lack of just lack of self-awareness really permeates through the whole thing. Anyway, Ethan is brought to a, for some reason uncredited, Anthony Hopkins, and informed that he needs to investigate Sean Ambrose, a man played by Dougray Scott, who was deliberately disguised as Ethan by the IMF to bring in the biochemical expert, but has gone rogue and intends to use the virus and cure for personal profit. Ethan must recruit a former flame of Ambrose's in the form of Naya, played by Tandy Newton, and along with a couple of other crew members, including a returning Ving Rhames, the heroes set about thwarting the villain's plans. The main thrust of the film is undoubtedly the romance between Ethan and Naya, and herein lie my problem with the film in both concept and execution. Now, I absolutely love Tandy Newton, and I think she's just a phenomenal actress, and she does perfectly fine here in this film. I don't think she has that much to work with, and I really don't think she has any chemistry with Cruise, and we're supposed to buy that the two of these people fall in love, like, really quickly, at first sight, pretty much. I was actually surprised to realize that what we're seeing in the film is supposed to be the first time the two characters have met. They just kind of shortcut their relationship so much that I assumed they must have known each other prior to the mission or something, but no, we're just supposed to buy that the pair are just falling in love before our very eyes. There's a scene between the two of them that reminds me very strongly of the GoldenEye car chase between Bond and Xenia, except the one here goes such a ridiculous extreme. Something that the movie is more deliberately trying to emulate, though, is Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, they even call out in dialogue the title of a Hitchcock film at one point.
I mean, I thought I was supposed to be some kind of thief to catch a thief.
And yeah, the film is trying to have To Catch a Thief sort of Notorious vibe, and I get a lot of North by Northwest out of it too, with a woman tangled up with the main villain of the film but actually in love with the hero, and also the villain having a strongly hinted at gay henchman who is jealous of the woman and tries to expose her. By the way, this guy is played by Richard Roxburgh, who's an Australian actor, but his accent in this film is so all over the place, and I get that in some places he's in disguise and trying to be someone else, but in scenes where he's presumably just being himself, it changes, like, mid-scene, and there's one part in particular where he sounds like he's doing an impression of Prince Philip. It's so weird.
She wasn't exactly gagging for it when she left you 6 months ago.
So all of the Hitchcock stuff is good in theory, and if Brian De Palma, a frequent emulator of Hitchcock, was directing, it just might work. However, the director of Face Off is really not the right man for such a thing, and I suppose it works to give the film something of its own identity, separate from the first film. They do, of course, call back to the iconic heist scene from the first one, but I applaud them for not just, like, doing the same thing. Like, Mission Impossible 2 is a very different thing to Mission Impossible 1. I just don't think all the tonal and thematic elements really coalesce, largely down to the director and the star, and maybe also the setting. I mean, the majority of this thing is set in Australia, Sydney specifically, which, I've never been to Sydney, but I don't think it's filmed in an especially interesting or mysterious way here. I mean, the personality of the setting doesn't come through at all, which is a real shame. With the exception of a shot of a wallaby, this could be any city. I do, however, like that I can actually follow this plot. I mean, I understand what is going on, and there are some fun twists in places. I think the film has no business being 2 hours long, and I think a good deal of the slow motion could be cut down. I mean, there's one scene in particular where Tandy Newton is walking towards Dougray Scott and Tom Cruise is watching, and it kind of starts out a bit suspenseful, and then the slow motion just keeps going and going and going, and then, oh my god, her scarf! Oh, he caught her scarf. Why is this important? Why are we focusing on this? I really don't understand what the point of all this slow motion and stuff is. There is also some fun action, but it just ends up being so over-bloated and hammy, particularly the final fight between the hero and the villain at the end. This bit where they charge their motorbikes at each other, leap off them, and then the bikes like explode for absolutely no reason, and then there's this protracted fight scene which should be at least half the length, but you know what, Tom Cruise wants to show off some of the stunts that he's learned, so we're not editing out any of this. The music doesn't help, I mean, with the exception of the Mission Impossible theme, which continues to be incredible, everything else is just so bloated and self-important and takes itself much too seriously. I just constantly wait for the joke, like the moment where the film is going to tell you, okay, you know what, we are aware that what this is really hammy and silly, and you, audience, are allowed to laugh at it, we're in on the joke, and we want you to have a good time with us, but there is no joke, it's just also earnest, and it has no right to be given this direction, which is so silly and over the top, and I wish the film had just embraced that instead of trying to be something deeper than that. Like, when you listen to all the stuff on the behind the scenes, oh my god, everyone just comes across so pompous, and it's like, have you seen what you have made? Have you seen this film? Not that I want them to go down a parody route, I don't want this to be like a scary movie Airplane style spoof. I just think there is a way to have fun with this kind of material and not come off so self-important. Comparing it to the first film, I think that the first film is undoubtedly better, and that's saying something when I still don't think I really fully understand what the plot of that film is. Like, scenes are happening and I have no idea what people are doing, but I'm having a much better time watching that first Mission Impossible film than I did watching the sequel. I think I'm kind of with the consensus on this. I think everyone kind of agrees that number 2 is not one of the better films in the series. I'm looking forward to inevitably getting to number 3, because that is a film that I remember seeing at the time of its release, and one that I remember quite well, actually. I seem to remember thinking that that film felt very, very different to the first two, but was just a much better ride. So I'm kind of really looking forward to getting to revisiting that film at some point in the future, and if you would like to have a say in what spy movies I review, then please do head over to my Patreon page, and you can find all the details on how to vote and support this channel there. In the meantime though, please do leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the movie, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.